Hi, I'm Kirsty Gillmore. I'm a freelance voice director, sound designer, casting director, and voice actor. And this talk is called Be a Better Voice Director, 3 Ways to Unlock Effective Performances. I'm going to outline 3 straightforward approaches to voice directing, emotional, technical, and physical, that will hopefully allow you to work collaboratively with your actors and capture compelling performances. It's specifically designed for audio people who don't come from a directing background, who find themselves directing actors as part of their game work. So a very short bit about me. I'm originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'm based in London in the UK. I have 20 years experience as a sound engineer and sound designer. I've been voice directing for 9 years, and I've spent the past 5 years directing voice acting for games. I've directed a range of games from mobile to indie and AAA. I'm currently voice director on Destruction All-Stars, which is a PS5 launch title for Lucid Games, and I'm also a voice director in the dialogue recording team for Baldur's Gate 3 for Larian Studios. And my sound design work crosses audio, drama, theatre and opera, and I also direct audio drama and animation, and I'm a BAFTA Games juror. So, in my opinion, our main aim for voice performance for games is for it to be totally believable, what in acting we would call truthful performances. You want the player to believe the character, and therefore the actor playing that character is actually living the world of the game. Which means you, in a voice recording session, you want the actors to react as they give you reads, as the characters would, as they experience the different environments, relationships, and scenarios in the game. Now, I'm a big believer that one doesn't have to come from a traditional directing background, like directing for screen or stage, or an acting background to be an effective voice director for games. However, as a voice director, you are a translator between the world of the devs and the actor. You have to take what the writers, the narrative designers, the animators, the sound designers, the composers, the cinematics team want from the performance, translate all of that, and give it to the actor in a way that they understand. And most actors with whom we work will probably, hopefully, be professionally acting trained or have professional acting experience, but they're likely not to know very much about games unless they've already got a lot of game voice experience. So communication between yourself and the actor is extremely important. And in my experience, not being able to communicate what you need from actors often leads to one of 2 approaches. The first one is asking for lots of takes and hoping that the actors will eventually hit on what you need, which I call the let's just do another one approach. And the second one is a line read. And a line read is when you take the line and you just say to the actor, just do it like this, and you give it to the actor the way you would do it. Now, these are, in my opinion, problematic and ineffective because it removes the actor's agency. All the preparation they've done for that character, all the decisions they've made about how that character feels and reacts, and the voice they've used, you've reduced that down to them just mimicking you, which will not give a truthful performance. So, to avoid these 2 scenarios, here are 3 approaches you can use to get more effective performances from actors by communicating with them on their level. The first one is emotional, or emotion-led, if you like. And this is using emotions to describe what you want from an actor. Basically, telling an actor how you want the character to feel at any given point, and potentially how you want the player to feel. So I would avoid using just really generic terms like happy or sad. Try more descriptive terms. You know, the character is absolutely overjoyed at this point. The character is emotionally distraught at this point. And also consider why they feel that way and give that information to the character. They feel absolutely overjoyed at seeing the dragon, not afraid because the dragon is there to rescue them. Okay? And remember, you can have a character experience multiple emotions over the course of several lines or one line. They can go on a journey. So they can start defiant and end up deflated, or the other way around. They can start emotional, almost on the verge of tears, and end up incredibly angry. The second approach is technical, and this is one that a lot of people use. And it works very well with actors who respond to this. So this can include inflections, upwards inflections, neutral inflections, downwards inflections. which you can also rephrase as having a more definite ending or going up at the end of the line. Smiling. Smiling is a really good technique just to get a brighter sound or a happier sound. You can just physically ask the actor to smile. It will be reflected in their voice. Vocal quality, asking for a raspier or huskier sound, a more nasal sound, a more denasal sound, which is a blocked nose sound. Telling an actor where to pause, so having pauses or beats. You can also use punctuation, telling them to ignore a comma or use the comma or make sure you read the full stop is something that I often say to actors. Some directors use musical terms, which can be a really useful shorthand to describe the overall style of what you're going for if the actor is musical and has that understanding. Staccato, legato. I want a crescendo up to this point. But even if the actor doesn't understand that, then you can, more separated, more deliberate, more measured. Also, pitch, pace, and volume are really useful things to do. And you can experiment with using more expressive words other than faster and slower or louder and softer. So saying more energy will probably give you a faster read and probably a louder read without having to say faster and louder. Asking for something that's calmer will probably give you a slower read and a softer read without having to say slower and softer. It will also give you an expressive quality on top of that. The third one is physical, both how the physical environment of a scene affects a character and therefore the actor's performance, and how the actor incorporates physicality into their performance, how they physically express the line. So let's talk about the physical environment of a scene. So if a scene is it's set on a mountainside and it's blowing a gale, you know that it's in the middle of a storm. That is going to affect how an actor performs the line. They're probably going to give it a lot more projection. They're probably going to act like it's difficult to hear their own voice and also difficult to hear other people's voices. They might make their speech a little bit slower to make sure that the other person can hear them. How the actor incorporates physicality into their performance can be as simple as, for example, they're reading something. Now, the difference between reading a book, reading a signpost, they might be reading an inscription. Just the differences between those can make a really big difference to the performance and how they place their voice and the pace of their voice. Also, things like they're leaving a message on the phone, getting them to physically just hold up a pretend phone to their ear. Or their character will be pointing a gun at someone at this point. Having them physically point a gun will change the way they perform. It introduces tension into the body, which will introduce an interesting tension into the voice. Some actors respond really well to mentally blocking the scene. Blocking is basically working out the character's movements in a scene, and it's something that is used for stage and screen. But it can be even if it's not mocap, which is obviously a whole different thing. Even if you're just on a fixed mic or on a body mic and it's just voice. The actor knowing that for the first two lines, they're walking up to the character, and the last line, they're really getting in the face. Or the first half of the sentence, they're walking around them, kind of musing to themselves, and then they stop and say the final part of the sentence directly to the player character. Can give you a really different feel. It will give you a really different performance. So, if you're not getting the performance you're after from an actor and you feel yourself reaching to say, just do it like this, consider emotional approach. How do I want the actor or the character to feel at this point? How do I want them to make the player feel? Technical. What technical changes do I want the actor to make? Physical. What physical aspects do I want the actor to reflect more in their performance to get the performance I want? I hope that was useful. You can find me at SoundsWild on Twitter and Instagram and my website, soundswild.com. Take care.
Hi, I'm Michael. I'm a composer and sound designer and co-founder of Tiny Red Camel. In this talk, I'd like to tell you all about one of the sounds in our game Shrunk Island: The Meeting. First, I'll give a little background about the game and what a thread is and what its role is in the game, and then talk about how that affected how I did the sound design for the thread. The shrugs are musical shape-shifting creatures, and they live in intimate harmony with their living island. The world was conceived by my Tiny Red Camel co-founder, artist and game designer Eliana Constantine. This game follows two young shrugs, Lee and Shri, who are returning to the island after having been away for a season. They land near each other, but they can't reach each other, and so your role as player is to help guide them to reunite and also to awaken the sleeping island. Lee can see hidden layers of the island's forgotten past, and Shri can play music that moves the landscape. These abilities are core to the puzzles they need to solve to move through the island. When we were testing the game, some of the players said they weren't sure if they'd solved all the puzzles in a location. So we needed an in-world signifier that was part of the story world and also said to the player, yes, you've finished the puzzles, you can move on to the next location. Eliana introduced a game element called the thread for the signifier. It originally appeared in her film Shrug, and in this clip you can see the Watcher, who's the keeper of balance on the island, with the thread. The Watcher also makes a few brief but important appearances in the game. Here's more thread artwork from Eliana. The one most relevant for us is the one on the right, which shows how the thread appears in-game when a puzzle has been solved and an island memory unlocked. So what should the thread sound like? Eliana's direction was, quoting her here, there should be a spiritual, air-like sound quality, but also changing form and history of the body of the land. Some kind of more earthy, grounded sound quality. And there should be harmonics with the feel of silence and sudden magic related to the beads. From a practical point of view, I also needed to design the sound so it would work with a variety of background soundscapes and be distinctive and not overpowering. And for the harmonic part, I couldn't use a plucked string harmonic because that would be too close to Shri's notes. Okay, so we'll start with a bowed harmonic sound. And here we're using the emotional cello library set to no legato and no vibrato on the harmonics. You can hear a little bit of bow in the sound, and it's nasal and a bit thin and almost organ-like. I'd like to fill out that sound a bit, so I'll layer it with Spitfire's Frozen strings from their lab series using the Frozen cello harmonic setting. You can hear the sound has a bit more depth, and there's a lot of bow noise which creates a nice sense of space around the notes. And this library also has some imperfections and wobbles, which is actually perfect for shrug music. Let's just check how the emotional cello and the Spitfire strings play together. Okay, now for the beads, we want something which is tonal and percussive, and which is clear but can sit well with the string sounds. For that, I'll use the Native Instruments giant cinematic piano, set to use the overtone, resonances, and pluck sounds. Let's listen to all three sounds together. Okay, we're making some progress. It still sounds like separate instruments, and we want it to sound like one integrated sound. So let's try adding some effects to blend them. The first effect is inspired literally by the visual graininess in the thread animation. It made me think of using a granular synthesizer. Here I'm using the Sound Toys crystallizer on the melodic suspension setting. That scruffs up the sound a bit, and there's also a pitch shift delay, which works kind of like a half-forgotten memory. Let's listen to it first on the strings by themselves. You can hear they sound a bit more gritty, and there's also that pitch-shifted harmony laying underneath them. Listening to it on the giant by itself, you can hear multiple echoes, each with a little pitch shift. Let's listen to all three together. So what we need now is for everything to sound like it's in the same space, and to pull the beads back a bit so they sound like they're enmeshed in the strings. So that calls for a reverb. I'll try adaptive reverb for that with the rich harmonic string setting, which gives a nice thick, short reverb. Okay, that's pretty close. There's one last tweak I'd like to make. If you notice on the thread, the visuals dissolve in and dissolve out, and I'd like the sound to dissolve in and out with the same timing. To do that, I'll lengthen the Spitfire notes so they start a little earlier and end a little later than the other notes. And that way the bow sound in the Spitfire will give that nice dissolving effect before and after the main sound. That's good. So now let's check it in one of Shri's scenes to make sure that the sound works together with his notes. And finally, here's the thread sound as the main musical element in the map scene. Thanks for listening. I hope we can meet in person someday, but for now we can meet in the Twitch chat.
Hello, my name is Colin Grant, and today I'm going to be talking about kind of being a jack of all trades in game audio, and professionally what that means and what that entails, and what I've come across in the past few years of working in game audio. This talk is definitely geared more towards those who are just starting out, as well as those who are even still just considering working in game audio. So I apologize if, this comes off as boring for those who have been in for a while, but hopefully this can be of help to some people. So, real quick, getting this out of the way, who am I? Why am I talking about this? So I've been in game audio for about 3 years, since about 2017, almost 4. I went to traditional 4-year college, just studying music in general. Then I did a 1-year diploma program at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. Around that time, I started doing dialogue cropping / editing. after I graduated, I spent a few months as a music intern at PlayStation, then went on to spend about a year, I should say, as a dialogue editor, but essentially freelancing. But most of my money, my bread and butter, came from dialogue editing for various companies. After that, I was picked up by PlayStation again, this time working as a dialogue coordinator for about a year. Then doing sound design for a few months on a project that I was already working on as a dialogue coordinator. And then for a little bit over a year now, I've been working as a music editor at 343 Industries up in Seattle. And throughout this whole entire time, of course, I've been composing and sound designing, freelancing on the side. That's never really stopped. Just kind of ebbs and flows depending on what my main income is. So just to kind of break down the types of employment, because this is something I definitely did not know starting out. You'd be a contractor for a video game company, which essentially means that you are, a recruiter reaches out to you, and you are hired not directly by that company, but by a third-party company, who essentially, that's where you'll be getting your benefits and your pay and, basic contract negotiations through. And after that, full-time at a video game company. This usually comes after being a contractor for multiple years, though it is different for everyone. Some people, may be able to get full-time right off the bat. But the only difference between that and being a contractor really is that there isn't necessarily a 3 or 6 month contract that you're on. You're directly hired by that company. Next is being a contractor, a freelancer, or a full-timer at a boutique studio, essentially outsourcers. From the AAA side, for whatever reason, not enough space, budget, or time, they will outsource a lot of their work, especially with dialogue. And so these companies like Team Audio, like Rocket Sound, like Soundcut, like Sweet Justice, will end up doing a lot of work on these big AAA jobs. This also includes some departments that are attached to larger studios, such as Warner Sounds, Skywalker, Technicolor, which are attached to bigger companies but still do outsourcing work for other companies. And then being independent, working for yourself, kind of a one-person audio team. Okay, and now to kind of get to the meat of it all, kind of the pros and cons that I found, because I've literally every year I've had a different job title in the past 3 or 4 years. So some of the pros is, one, of course, diversifying your portfolio is never a bad thing. They say the type of economy we live nowadays, this gig economy, people are more often to work multiple jobs, doing multiple different things with multiple different streams of income. And while it's still very specialized, doing sound design versus dialogue versus music, it can still be very useful having all these skills and actively working on them. Two, you get to do a little bit of everything. Personally for me, I like, waking up in the morning, writing some music, in the afternoon, get some dialogue editing in, do some sound design at night. I like doing a little bit of everything. One of my favorite things about the job I did as a contractor at PlayStation is that while I was a dialogue coordinator, I'd also help doing recording engineering. I'd also help with working on some of the advertisements. So I got to do a lot of different things within that one job specification. And finally, if you're a freelancer and you're working specifically for an indie company, you can have a lot more control over not just what you do, but also possibly, the vision of the project. And a lot of people like having that type of really close creative control that you may not have as much as an input on if you're taking a more traditional route up. Cons, if you do want to end up, working for a traditional company, there's certain, bullet points you may not hit as quickly as other people in terms of, oh yeah, I worked on one project for more than a year, or, I've, had 5 years with this particular job title. Of course, the closer you are to the people who are hiring you, the less that matters. But, a recruiter looking at your resume may raise an eyebrow. And also promotions, if you don't keep the same job from beginning to end. Over the course of a few years, it can be harder to justify why you may, not be a junior or whatever, if that's what you want. Obviously, again, every situation is different, but, these are things to keep in mind. If you're looking to be a freelancer, starting out can be incredibly difficult. You may think about possibly having another job, either within the industry or outside the industry to help support you during this time. I know, I've been lucky enough to only work in game audio, but, I've definitely gotten close to, picking up a second job outside of it to help support myself. There's nothing wrong with that. But especially when you're starting out and establishing yourself, it can be difficult to find enough work to sustain yourself. Even when I was working, essentially full time as a freelancer for all these companies, making money that I should have been able to support myself. Finding payment structures are different as a freelancer versus being a contractor. So that's something to keep in mind. And finally, there are only so many hours in a day you can work on your craft. So, you will be, dividing your time. That's something to think about. If you want to be super specialized, you may not be able to put as many hours into sound design or music if you're doing everything. For some people, that's more important than others. So kind of like what I've learned is everyone's path is different. Obviously this is super generic, but it bears repeating because it's true. Everyone's path is different, and you don't necessarily know everything about someone's path. So that's something to keep in mind, especially when things may seem isolated. So people move back and forth between being specialized versus being generalized. Sometimes someone can spend 5 years as just a sound designer for one company and then spend the next, 10 years, working for themselves, and back and forth. Some people know what they want to do right away. Others, it does not test. It takes times. I guess that works. And also just kind of words of affirmation in these trying times. You're probably doing better than you think you are. You don't need to have all the answers right now. That's something I'm constantly having to remind myself every day. So thanks. And I hope this was useful.
Hello everyone and welcome to my Game Audio LA Microtalk networking for introverts. So first off, who the heck am I? I'm a composer and audio specialist for media projects. Basically, I do it all. And I actively network throughout my college years, which made a huge difference in my career growth. So today we're going to talk about networking, even if you're an introvert, colleagues versus clients networking events, and most importantly, how to talk to people. Yes, every time is question time. So if you have a question about the talk, about anything I'm talking about, I'm going to be in the chat answering your questions live. So please ask away, okay? Great. So here's how we tend to picture networking. As people just schmoozing in a room, not really wanting to be there, kind of gloomy, terrible setting, just not the best place to be, as how we picture networking. But what networking really is it's just an opportunity for people who want to find you to meet you. And that's really it. That's all it is. So what if I'm an introvert? Sorry, nope. You still have to network because it will make a difference in how your career grows and progresses. I'm an introvert too, and I made this talk just for you because I know how hard it is to be an introvert and want to put yourself out there. It sounds contradictory, but once you overcome that, you can do a lot of things. So trust me when I say that it's worth it in the long run. So let's talk about something that I want to discuss now, which is colleagues versus clients networking events. So a colleague networking event is an event where you're going to encounter a lot of people that work in your same field. You're probably going to be able to swap stories about how things are going in your field and maybe have some things in common. But chances are these people aren't going to be hiring you because they're working in the same field as you. So they're not going to be looking for someone to do your work because they're already doing your work. Whereas client networking events are events where there's a great variety of people in the room. And because of that, chances are there's going to be a lot more people who are going to be able to hire you and be interested in your services because there's going to be directors, there's going to be screenwriters, there's going to be producers, and they're going to say, oh, you're an audio person. I need an audio person. Let's work together. And as a personal rule, I tend to attend more client networking events. And that's not because there's anything wrong with colleague networking events. They're great for meeting other people in your field, and they're fantastic for hearing from other people how things are progressing as their careers grow. But if you want to find your clients, you need to attend client networking events. So that's where you need to be. Now, let's cover something else. Let's cover, before you go to a networking event, what do you need to know? First of all, is it a colleague networking event or a client networking event? It should be pretty easy to tell the difference. If there's going to be a lot of people who do what you do in the room, it's a colleague networking event. If there's going to be a great variety of people in the room, it's a client networking event. Secondly, do you have everything you need? You need business cards and plenty of them. I take like 15, 20 cards a night, and sometimes I have them all handed out at the end of the night. It really depends on the event, but I've had more than one instance where I've taken a whole stack of business cards, and by the time the night's over, I have no business cards left. So you need to take more than you'll think you need because you never know who you're going to meet and what's going to happen at a networking event. On the subject of what you need, is your website up to date? Because this is really important. Once people see who you are and get your business card, the first thing they're going to do is look at your website. So if your website is not up to date and doesn't have your most recent information, doesn't have your most recent reel, doesn't have their most recent credits, they're not going to take you as seriously as you should be taken. So you need to have your website be up to date before you go to a networking event as well. And also, what are you wearing to the event? Just because your industry wears casual clothes on the job doesn't mean you should wear them to a networking event. I should know. I work in the film industry, and we often dress in jeans and a t-shirt on set. But doesn't mean I'm going to show up to a networking event wearing jeans and a t-shirt. I'm going to be wearing some nice clothes because I want people to know that I'm a professional and I expect to be treated as professional as possible. So wear something that shows that you want to be treated professionally. Don't wear something that just because your field dresses casually doesn't mean you should dress casually. Now, how to talk to people. This is an important part. And introverts, I want you to pay special attention to this. First of all, have your elevator pitch ready to go. There's a simple 1 or 2 sentences that summarizes who you are, what you've done, and what kind of things you contribute. So here's mine as an example. My name is Eliana Zebro. I'm an audio professional for media projects in the film and podcasting worlds. I've worked with Comedy Central, a documentary funded by the North Face, and many great independent productions. And sometimes I add an additional sentence like, making projects sound the best they can be is my passion and I love what I do. But it depends on the event. So that's a quick elevator pitch for you. You need to come up with your own that fits who you are, what you've done, and what you want to do. So come up with a good pitch. Secondly, I want to tell you something that's really, really important that I learned. It's okay to grow into a group of people. So if you go up to a group of people that are talking and they say, hey, can I join the circle? Chances are they're going to be like, yes, join us, please. We'd love to chat. I've never asked someone to join their group of people and been like, no, you cannot join us. How dare you ask that question? That has never happened to me. Every time I've asked to join a group of people who are already chatting, they've been so gracious and been so happy to let me join the circle and join in the conversation. And that's something that's been revolutionary for me to learn as an introvert, so I hope that it's good for you to learn as well. And I recommend you do this with groups of 3 or more people only, because a group of 2 people could possibly be old colleagues catching up or old friends who don't really want to talk to anyone else in the room. So they might not want you to join the circle. They might just want to talk to each other. So go into a group of 3 or more people, say, can I join the circle, and be accepted warmly among their ranks. And also, when you're talking to people, do not be self-absorbed. This is really important. Don't talk about just yourself and your projects. Always, always, always turn the mic to the other person. Say, what about you? What have you been doing? What projects are you working on? You do not want to be the person who only talks about themselves and their projects at a networking event, because it just comes off as you don't care about the other people in the room. So do not be self-absorbed. By all means, do not. Don't do it. Don't know what to say? Yeah, I've been there too. So ask what the people around you do for a living. Ask how they heard about the event or how long they've been involved in the organization hosting the event. This can be a fantastic icebreaker. If you're at an event, ask what kind of drink they ordered. If you're at a bar, people might have a drink of preference that they might want to talk about. So talk about that too. And then for client networking events, ask if they have any products they're working on right now and express an interest with working with them. This is really important because you need to put yourself out there. You don't just want to go to an event and be like, oh, I'm just going to keep to myself and hope I don't encounter too many people. No, you need to be active and proactive. You need to ask people, hey, what projects are you working on right now? And after they explain to you what it is, and you give them the attention they deserve as you ask your inquiry, express an interest in working with them on that project, and always, always be authentic. Authenticity is one of the most important rules of networking, and if you're not authentic, people aren't going to take you seriously. So you need to be authentic at all times. Don't express an interest in working on someone's project if you don't actually care about their project. You need to actually care. You need to be authentic. And if you're not authentic, then you need to reevaluate yourself and ask why you're not being authentic. Because if the reason you're not being authentic is because you're nervous, you need to reevaluate everything I'm telling you, because I'm telling you, you don't need to be nervous. You can go into groups of people and be accepted. You can talk to people and be accepted. You don't need to be as nervous as you think you need to be. Take it from someone who's been doing this for a long time. Always get their business cards so you can follow up about their projects, follow up about what they're working on. And then when to leave conversations and events is also an important thing to know. Be one of the first people to arrive and the last to leave. This is because this will give you a lot of opportunities to meet a lot of people. If you arrive early and arrive at a good time, then you can meet a lot of people. And if you're one of the last people to leave, that means that you're taking advantage of what the entire room has to offer. If you already talked out a conversation with somebody, you feel like it's kind of petered out, you've talked about everything that you've wanted to talk about, you are 100% free to excuse yourself and say, it was nice to meet you. Because it was nice to meet them and it was a good conversation, but now it's time to move on. And that's perfectly fine. So feel free to excuse yourself. Say, it was nice to meet you. Take their business card if you would like. And then go on to a new conversation. And then after you go to a networking event, here's what you need to do. Follow up with everyone you met the day after, because that will keep you top of mind and then they will remember you most easily when you do this. If they said they want to work with you at the event, mention that in your email and ask to discuss it further. Don't be shy, don't be timid. Alternatively, if they mention an upcoming project of theirs while you talk to them at the event, express that you're eager to work with them on it. And again, be authentic. Authenticity is one of the most important rules of networking. If you don't actually want to work on someone's project, it will show in your message. So you need to be authentic in whatever you say. If you want to work with someone on their project, express that you're eager to work with them on it. Be authentic. They want you to stay in touch or say they don't have a project right now but will in the future. You need to stay in touch. You are not bothering them by staying in touch. It's what they want you to do. In summary, colleagues versus clients at networking events are an important thing to remember. It's important to approach groups of people and always follow up the day after the event. Congratulations! If you've listened to this entire talk, you did it! You learned how to network! Woohoo! Good for you! So happy! Yes! So, this is who I am, Eliana Zebro. I'm an audio specialist for media productions. My website is elianazebro.com. My email is eliana.antoinette.z@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook, Eliana Zebro, and Twitter at The Story Singer. And thank you so much for listening, guys. If you have any questions, pop them in the chat. I will answer them. I promise. If you have any additional questions that you don't think of for the chat, then please email me and I will answer those questions too. Okay? My email is right on the screen. All right? Have a good day. I love you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
So without lengthy introductions, I'll get to the gist of why I made this presentation. I've put together a small list of 5 major points / takeaways that you can think about that relates to the
intersection of the music industry and the video game industry, all of these 5 points are just as applicable to solo game developers as well as audio people as much as they are towards musicians and composers, and it could be useful for all kinds of people involved in the music industry as well as the video game industry. So, moving on, um, I think the first point that I'd like to make is, as a whole, you have to think about not just the music industry or just the video game industry. I think largely with the convergence that's happening these days, you have to think yourself as part of the media industry that encapsulates the music industry, encapsulates the video game industry, and a lot of other things as well. So yeah, I'll probably um, link you to a couple of these YouTube videos that are like panels, that could be interesting to watch if you're trying to think in a different fashion about how you're going to be approaching a video game as a musician or as a software developer. So I wanted to start this point with a meme, and largely what the point of the meme is that if you're only doing one very specific thing, like you're only doing music, and you're not doing much of anything else, the opportunities, like especially in the video game industry, like from what my experience has been, is the opportunities are going to be limited. So there's also going to be a lot of competition for these opportunities. So the best way, I guess, to get a foot into the door when you're trying to find these opportunities would be either to stand out and have a very unique perspective on the same job and having an outstanding portfolio, or also you could tap into these opportunities from an off the beaten path kind of approach, like not going in the same way that everybody else is. So think in a different way. Look out for opportunities, but look for them in a slightly smarter way. Find projects that make sense for you creatively as well as ability wise. And instead of being passive, try and find opportunities actively. Um, Look for hashtags. Pitch your game or screenshot Saturday are a great couple of hashtags to look at when you're looking at possible games that might be on the horizon in development. Look at collaborating with Twitch streamers, um, doing like intro songs, like ending songs for some of these streamers. Um, you know, there's a lot of different ways that you can think about it, and these are just some of them. More than just being a creator, also think about how the industries function and how there might be interdependence, and tap into those things. One example of this I would like to give is AR VR. Like AR VR has sort of, I feel it's transcended the traditional role of what the purpose and objectives of video games were initially, and there's been a lot more experimentation happening there in terms of how AR VR games are being distributed, how they're being funded, and how people are using them to make new sort of points. So I would say just think about music, like think as a musician, but also think as a founder of a company. Um, there's and that kind of thinking has its own interesting set of consequences, and those consequences can be good. Some of them can be not so good. But we're going through a pandemic, so I think it is important to realize that a lot of old ways of thinking might be on the way to become redundant. So we might have to change a lot about how we think about opportunities and how music connects into you know the world as a whole in general. I guess the next point would be understand the ecosystem generally of the video game industry as well as the music business. Um, Especially I want to focus on this section for the audio and the music people. Every time you take a job, read, understand, and analyze the contracts that you're signing, ask questions, make sure the relationships you're getting into are able to benefit you in the long run just as much as they do in the short run. Um, if you're working with indie developers, there's always a sliding scale of what you're able to work on and bring to the table versus the monetary compensation that you're being offered. Always try and keep publishing if possible. Um, License the music non-exclusively for limited time periods versus doing a perpetual exclusive work for hire. Avoid blanket terms in agreements like automatic 2-year renewals or like giving rights away for perpetuity. The more control you're able to have um, as rights owners over your own music catalog, the more your opportunities can multiply as time passes by. um, you can license music again and again if you're licensing it non-exclusively, versus just giving it exclusively. um, Learn from other people's mistakes also, like as I had mentioned earlier, that look into your competition. I would also say that the opposing side of that, build communities, talk to other composers, find out where they went wrong with an agreement or with the job, and see if you can not make those mistakes. um, Lastly, I would say think uniquely, solve problems where possible. um, if you're a music creator or a game developer, the way you think about the world might be very unique to you, and how you approach your work will sooner or later um, be affected by that. So, make sure you develop a sound and a brand of your own that will stand out. Do different things, build a video game of your own, or uh, inculcate hobbies, different hobbies that might not be related, but use those hobbies to diversify what you do and see if you can help build new income streams for your music. There's as many as 42 different income streams. Think entrepreneurially, apply to grants whenever possible. um, and in the starting stages, most people there isn't enough money, or there's a limit on the amount of time you can spend on projects. So just look at grants and unique brand partnerships as a way to offset that power balance. For example, there's a friend of mine, who played in a band, and he was really trying to get into music for video games. So, since not a lot of game developers were looking for music from bands, what he did was he created chiptune versions of each of his songs, and a lot of them ended up working for a lot of different video games. So there's always new ways to think about these things. So that kind of ends my presentation. And to end with, my contact details are here. Um, you can get me on Instagram or Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and my website link is right there. Um, so yeah, you can check that out if you're interested in connecting with me, and if you have any further questions. I also have these bunch of links that I'm going to leave it up there, and you can just check some of these links out. The ICO Steam newsletter is an interesting one because it basically lists every week the games that have released in early access, as well as everything that gets released every week goes out in a newsletter. So that one is pretty interesting. and the other ones too. So, yeah, I hope that you got out of this panel what you were expecting, and thank you for listening.
Hello everyone, my name is Hillel Teplitzki. I'm a composer for media, specializing in video games. Firstly, I'd like to just start off by giving a huge thank you to the folks at Game Audio LA for choosing me to be one of the panelists. My micro talk will talk mostly about networking, how it was super important to my career, how thanks to it I got my first gig on a AAA game, how thanks to it I'm currently nominated for Israel's version of the Oscars for a feature film that I wrote for, the music for. So, since we don't have a lot of time, I'll of course be available for Q&A afterwards, but I'd like to just quickly give some tips about the things that I see people doing right with networking and the things that I see people doing wrong, some mistakes. So I'd actually like to start off with the mistakes, since I think it's super important not to do these mistakes. Before you can think about the positive, and I can talk about how it was positive in my experience, just would like to give these warnings just to make sure that you guys don't do any of these mistakes. So, quickly. First and biggest mistake that I see is viewing other people who are doing your profession. So, if you're a composer, seeing other composers. If you're a mixing engineer, seeing other mixing engineers. If you're an instrumentalist, seeing other instrumentalists, and so on, as your competition. This is a really bad mindset, and it won't help you. It will only hurt you. Why? So firstly, just having this negative mindset, just thinking of like, oh, I'm not succeeding because of these other people. This is not a good idea. It will just really hurt your productivity. At least I think it will hurt most people's productivity and just desire to keep working hard. And also, if you show people that that's your mindset, if you show people that you're bitter, that is the worst thing you can do, and just a fantastic way of making sure that people don't want to work with you. No one wants to work with someone bitter. That is not a fun experience for anyone. So, besides that just being a bad mindset, why else do I think it's so bad? So, because at least in my experience, right, the biggest gigs that I've gotten were from other composers. The AAA gig that I mentioned before, and also the feature, they both came from being in great contact with other composers. All right. So besides this mistake, I see another very prominent mistake, and it's who to approach. So if we already said that you should approach composers and creators, such as game developers and film creators alike, who to approach. So I see some composers only try to reach out, at least with composers I see it more, that they only try to reach out to composers who already worked on several AAA titles, at least, if not more. And just thinking, what's the point of getting in contact with someone who's just starting out? I won't gain anything out of this. This is also quite a big mistake, because I think that it's much better for you to get in contact with someone you can actually get along with than a composer that you have nothing in common with, and it doesn't matter what he worked for. If you don't have anything in common, he hasn't affected you, and you don't really have anything to talk about with him, it's not going to go well, because in the end of the day, it doesn't matter how many projects you work for, you're just a human being. Just imagine if someone just reached out to you, you don't have anything in contact with them, you don't know them, and they ask you to trust them with a very important project. Would you do it, or would you rather get in contact with a friend of yours or someone you at least knows can handle it well? Most likely the latter. So I would like to take this opportunity, though, to say how I took this mindset and actually did get an assistantship position under Nonsur, who's a composer that I utterly admire. He's amazing. And honestly, also just one of the nicest, most humblest people that I've ever met, even though he's so successful. So I reached out to him and just thought that we could have a talk. And it was very helpful, since I already attended a lecture of him, and one of my old academy teachers happened to know him, so he was someone to get us acquainted. Now, instead of just sitting there after meeting him and just talking about how great my music is and that you should really listen, we just had a talk. We just had a lot of fun. He was very helpful. He wanted to help me out in LA and just give me some general tips. But instead, we had such great chemistry. They asked me if I would like to just hang around while he's composing the music for Fallout 76. I was just shocked since I just graduated from Berkeley like a couple of months ago. So already getting this opportunity to sit there and see how music for a very big AAA game is being made. It was just an amazing opportunity, and I of course said yes. Now, after he finished composing for that day, he asked me if I would like to just come back another week, and I was like, yes, because he said that he really enjoyed our chemistry. And again, I think the reason he enjoyed our chemistry is because we had a lot in common. We were both composers from Israel that moved to LA and wanted to see how it's like, and were mostly interested in video games. We had a lot in common. So it wasn't just talking about how great my music is, how I'm different than other composers. He wouldn't really care about that. It would be not a very good route. Instead, we just had talk as human beings. Now, these small visitations that started just a weekly visitations, slowly I started doing him some more favors, like helping him install libraries and so on. And then he was like, oh, if you're already doing work for me, let's make this official. And this is how I got a gig under a AAA composer, which was amazing. And again, at least in my experience, but I think always this is the right way to approach AAA composers. See if you have anything in common with them, if their music already inspired you, and just finding a way to make yourself stand out from others and not just go like, here's my card, just get in contact with me, because they won't. Now, another way that I think is super important for networking, but generally just your mindset, is using failures and rejections as opportunities for networking. And let me explain. So during my final semester at Berkeley, we were given an opportunity. Now, Berkeley is amazing because it really knows how the industry is. So something that it likes to do is basically take opportunities to make students compete with each other. Now, you could say that, oh, this is bad because it's going to create, hostility between students. But no, it's whoever gets the gig, and there's no hard feelings. This is how it should always be. You shouldn't be mad that you didn't get the gig. You should be happy if your friend got it, because you should be happy for them. And again, they might ask you to collaborate with them, so why be bummed? Anyways, so they reached out to us, and they said that they have another school who is doing masters in animation, and they scored a cinematic, and they would like to make us compete for who gets to score it. Now, they showed us the cinematic, and it was set in the Dark Souls universe. Now, Dark Souls is one of my favorite games. I just love the entire saga, just the Soulsborne, if you're familiar with it. Anything that's dark fantasy is just really up my alley. So I was super excited, and they only gave us a weekend to score a cinematic that was about 2 minutes. Now, if you already know what you're doing, it might sound like no big deal. What, 2 minutes in an entire weekend? That's amazing. That's so much time. But I was still a student, right? I didn't really know I was doing that well back then. So it was quite daunting to score 2 minutes in a weekend. So I think I slept like 3 hours that weekend and really just gave it 110%. And I was really confident with what I scored. I was really happy with it, and I sent it to them. And of course, I got rejected. Not fun. I have to admit that I was quite crushed back then, because I specialize in these dark orchestral compositions, and I thought to myself, damn, if I get rejected for my specialty, what I'm best at, what's the point? But I didn't let myself stay bummed like that for too long. It's not good to be bummed. Just find ways to make things happen. So instead, I went on Facebook, I looked for games, and until I found a game that I thought, this is exactly what I like to do. So I reached out to them. I had this composition that I already made that was just sitting there unused, especially for this dark orchestral fantasy type setting, right? So I reached out to them, and they weren't looking for a composer at the time. And I'll give, the project is called Descent into Madness. I'll put some images here while I talk. So they weren't looking for a composer back then, but I reached out to them and was like, hey, listen, I really enjoy what you posted. The pictures look amazing. And even though you guys aren't looking for a composer right now, I would be happy to work on it just in case you are looking. Even if you're not, I would just love to hear more details about the game and just to play it, because I'm really impressed by it. And here's my music if you're interested. And I sent them the music that was rejected from the Dark Souls one. So they actually got back to me and said that they love my music and that they would love to work with me. So just an example of how to take these failures and actually make projects out of them. So unfortunately, we don't really have any more time, even though I would love to just keep on talking about all my experiences and how I turned other failures into stories of success and so on. So if you have any other questions about your networking experience, don't hesitate to get in contact with me, either in the Q&A or social media. I'll put on links. So have a great day, night, wherever you are, and thank you for listening.
Hi Game Audio LA, I hope you're doing well. It's great to see all of you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Thal. I am a technical sound designer and audio engineer at Turn Me Up Games. For those of you who have met me or seen some of my YouTube content, you may know that I'm just a little bit of a fighting game fan. And I've noticed over time that diving really deeply into these games has actually taught me a lot about how to become a better sound designer and promote myself better as a sound designer. So I wanted to share some of those skills and things I've learned over time with you. Now, I want to clarify, fighting games are not the only place you can learn these things. These are just where I happen to learn them. Maybe you can figure out ways that you find similarities in some of your favorite genres of games or just some other part of the world completely different. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing I'd like to highlight is that realistic sounds don't always make good sounds. In fact, frequently they don't. Things that we often think we know what they sound like are really just how we've heard them in movies, television, video games, etc. If you've dove into sound design for hand-to-hand combat or weapon sounds, you'll know that there is a lot of layering involved. Those are certainly there, but that's not exactly what I'm referring to right now. In fighting games, there's sometimes added aspects of sound effects that make absolutely no sense, no logical sense whatsoever. One great example I love that doesn't make realistic sense, but also ties into a character is with Sagat from Street Fighter. One of Sagat's defining traits is he says the word tiger before a lot of his special moves. In fact, he's closely associated with the animal and is sometimes depicted with an actual tiger. In Street Fighter 4, if you listen closely during his tiger uppercut, you can actually hear a tiger roaring while he is doing this big uppercut on the opponent. It's kind of cool, right? I mean, there's no tiger anywhere in the arena, but it does really tie into his character backstory, and it sounds pretty sick. The next thing I want to talk about is frame data. Fair warning, this may be a slightly difficult topic. Even people in the fighting game community are sometimes overwhelmed by it. So don't worry, I will try to explain it as simply as I can. If you've worked in film or video games or television, you may have heard the terms thrown around that something runs at 30 frames per second, something runs at 60 frames per second, whatever. Most video games, specifically fighting games, do run at 60 frames per second. At an in-depth level, fighting game players use frames as a unit of time.
Nearly every attack in a fighting game has 3 phases. They're called the startup, active, and recovery frames. But I think it helps to look at it as simply beginning, middle, and end.
You may realize from these images that if you put startup, active, and recovery together, you get the entire animation of a move. And this is good because you have a better idea of what the animators on your team are doing. You have a better understanding of their part of game development. And by extension, you're able to communicate with them much more effectively. The other reason why this is really important is sound design. It helps you get a better idea of how long you might want your sound effects to be. If you have an idea that an animation takes 60 frames, so 1 second, it's not going to be a good idea to design a sound that might play for 5 seconds because that's way longer than you need. Having this knowledge of how animations work through learning frame data can be incredibly helpful and make you a stronger team player who is creating more fitting sound effects. This next bit of knowledge might be more applicable if you're a technical sound designer, but still certainly could have its uses when you're not more on the technical side. In fighting games, you often try to find really powerful strategies because you want to beat your opponent. You really dive into the minutia of the game's mechanics and your character's abilities to really try to find some of the craziest stuff you can do, things that maybe your opponents won't be able to escape and they're like forced to block something. This idea of just trying and trying again and continuing to like break down, oh, what's wrong with this, or maybe how can I improve it? And if you've worked in game dev or technical sound design things already, you probably know that I'm getting at bug testing and troubleshooting. There are many times where maybe you're working in Unreal or Unity and you're just trying to get your sound effects to play the right way. You just have to keep on digging at it and keep on trying, and that idea and that persistence that you may have developed from playing fighting games can be really helpful. Now, this next tip is way more applicable if you are a freelancer, but still very helpful if you are in a team, and that is learning about color theory. If you've looked at my website or my YouTube channel, you may have seen this logo. As I was playing a lot of fighting games, I realized that a color scheme that showed up in a lot of characters that I think are really awesome was red and white. Character artists, especially in fighting games, really try to make the characters stand out. And a lot of the designs of these characters are based in the artistic ideas of color theory. If you start seeing those sort of color combinations in characters you like, it could be helpful to apply those to some of your promotional material. Furthermore, it might help you think of how to present those colors through sound. Sometimes we say like, oh, this sound is like a nice warm feeling, right? Well, maybe if you see that a character has like a warm color of like a red or an orange, trying to aim for those sort of warmer sounds with them might be more helpful. A website that is really helpful when it comes to learning the basics of color theory and what colors might go well together is mycolor.space. I'll leave a link in the Twitch Q&A for the live stream and in the description of the YouTube video when I post this. Last but not least, I'd like to talk about something that is probably one of the most prominent issues that you'll run into when playing fighting games, and many people outside of the fighting game community probably know about. I'm just gonna play this clip first to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. I love these special move callouts. They are iconic and so memorable from the franchises they originate from. But hearing the exact same clip over and over and over and over again can absolutely lead to audio fatigue over time. Something to consider with any sort of game that you're developing is to have some variation on these audio clips, whether that means having a couple different clips that you can swap between, or having some little effects like some extra EQ or something, just to change it a little bit. Now the caveat is you're not going to want to change it too much. Humans react faster to audio stimuli than visual stimuli. And this is really important in fighting games. Any amount of time that you can get, or that the player can have to make a decision, they will take it. And having those audio cues to sort of ingrain in their mind that this is the move that's happening is very helpful for the player. Now, the one exception I will say to repeated voice clips is for sequences that don't happen often. Let's take another look at a Street Fighter example to show you what I'm talking about.
Hope you like this! Get ready!
This voice clip plays whenever the character activates their Ultra combo. The player won't even use an Ultra every round. There are some situations where it's just not smart to use it. So the fact that it doesn't come up often, but it's a big turning moment when it does happen, it's really good to have that same voice clip to get the player excited. It really builds that player-character connection. Thank you everyone for coming out today. I hope this talk was really helpful. I've left my contact information in case you have any other questions, so please feel free to reach out. Until then, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Matthew Marteinsson. I'm one of the sound designers at Clay Entertainment up in Vancouver, BC. And I'm here today to quickly talk to you about feedback. Not the audio feedback, but the kind that we give on our work, on sound effects and music and revisions and all that kind of stuff. So where should we start? Feedback happens all the time. It's obviously a huge part of what we do. And the better we can get at it, the better we can do our jobs. Because so much we do involves revising things, changing things. We rarely will hit it the first time when we're making something. So the better we can get at telling people and receiving being told how to change things will just make our jobs better and quicker. So, a couple of things to consider. Giving is different than receiving, and you kind of have to put yourself in the right mindset when each is going on. And it's good to think about being on both sides of that, so that you're aware of how you're giving or receiving maybe being perceived by the other party. You should know who you're getting and receiving from. And one of the biggest things I feel is, are you receiving feedback from a non-audio person? They will use a different language than a trained, informed audio person. So you might get things that are a little more confusing or not what you think they are. The one I use most famously is I was asked to make something more purple. That was early on in my career, so I didn't handle that feedback the best I could, and I would probably do a way better job of it now. But I just had nothing. I had no context of what that person meant by make it more purple. Other colors, I might have been able to, work my way around of like, what is the feelings behind that? Where could that possibly lead, and possibly gotten somewhere. Purple was totally mystified me. Didn't know what to do with that. That's possibly the worst feedback I got from somebody. And what I ended up doing, because I wasn't as informed as I am now, been doing this a lot more since then, I just made a change and sent it back going, is that closer or further away from what you wanted? Because I needed more data points to really figure out what they meant. I don't remember at all where it went, or if I succeeded, or how many times it took me to get to more purple. But I would probably be able to do it a lot quicker now than I did back then. So let's delve into giving feedback. When I'm giving feedback to somebody who's making assets for me, I like to start vague and work towards being more exact as the revision process goes on. Because this person has been hired, I've hired them, somebody has hired them to, because of their skills and because of the creative aspects that they have about them. And I want to harness what's interesting and unique and creative about that person and not make them a cookie cutter of me. So the first time I give feedback, I will, be vague but direct in the direction we actually, want it to go and change, but still leave enough room that they can bring their stuff to the table and hopefully surprise me with something that I wouldn't have thought of if I had given them the exact, line by line, do this, EQ it like this, do this, do this. I want their interpretation of things. I compare it to voice actors not wanting line reads. When you're coaching a voice actor, you don't want to say the line to them, this is exactly how I wanted to do it, because then they won't act, they won't bring what they bring to the character. They'll just, spew back what you did. And that's not what any of us want. We want all of the aspects of what we do to involve the creativity of the person involved. So I found that's good to give them a room, and if we are doing more revisions and they're not getting to what's working, not that they're creating exactly what you thought in your head, but that what they need to create what works for the game. I will get more exact as we go on. I think this is the reason why this still isn't working. It's got too much of this, or it's, whatever. And a common thing to do is the old good, bad, good sandwich. When you're giving advice, tell the person something that they did well, then something that needs to be changed, and then something that they did well again. And that's to say, not just to say things to be nice about stuff. We still need constructive feedback, and just telling everybody hey, that was great and awesome when it wasn't is, something I saw a lot when I started reviewing people's reels. Was just no, you're telling this person that's good when it's not. Don't do that. But still point out the parts that work, so that it's not just all negative. Let's flip over to the receiving end. One of the things I like to say a lot is other people phrase it as kill your darlings. I prefer slightly more extreme, kill your babies. And that's to say, don't hold anything that you've made so precious that you're not open to changing it. We have to be open to these things. More often than not, we are not the end line of approving something. There is generally, often another audio person above us, or there is a game designer above us, or a programmer, or somebody creative person that has input on what the game as a whole may take. So we have to be open to serving that person's vision, and make sure that we're not getting super defensive about being asked to make changes. And that's not to say to just do anything that you're asked when it comes to revisions. I think it's very fair, and I encourage people when I'm working with them to justify why they think something shouldn't be changed. If maybe it's a case of you've made something that doesn't sound that great all on its own, and that's how the person's hearing it, but in the greater context of where it happens in the game, there's reasons that you've cut the low end, or whatever, to make it work with everything going on. So somebody's like, hey, I think this is change, it sounds weak. And you can go, well, actually, I totally understand that, but I've made it weak sounding because it needs to fit in with X, Y, and Z that's going on at the same time. Let's check it out in that context and see if you still feel the same way. So don't just roll over on everything. It's perfectly fair to have a justified reason to not make a change. And in that regard, ask lots of questions. If somebody's giving you feedback, make it more purple, ask, well, what do you mean by that? Is it, this aspect or that aspect, or what's, am I not aware of something that is supposed to fit in with, or don't go away confused. Do everything you can to not go away confused. I certainly used to do that early on in my career, of just take it on and be like, right. I'm going to go off and change that, and realize when I walked away that, like, I don't actually know what I'm supposed to change. So I heartily encourage people to ask me questions when I'm asking for changes of things. So that's just some quick tips on how you can give and receive better feedback. Hopefully that was some new information to everybody. Thanks for listening, and I hope you're enjoying all the talks today.
Hi, my name is David Sue, pronouns he, him, and welcome to my microtalk. I'm really excited to be here. So for those of you who don't know, Animalese is the language that's used in the Animal Crossing games. So basically each letter gets matched to a specific sound, and this leads to some interesting and kind of uncanny moments where you can sort of make out words, but most of the time they're kind of garbled. But really interesting audio-wise. There's actually this really great Polygon video that gives an in-depth look at how Animalese has changed throughout the Animal Crossing games. But here we're just going to look at the broad strokes. So yeah, how do we actually implement this from a game audio perspective? So we want to create a sound for each letter, trigger the right sound for an input letter, and make a user interface to kind of put it all together. So these are the tools that we'll be using. And there's this intermediate step that basically an event is a unit of sound content, and it just helps the game engine reference sounds in a more flexible way than, say, like directly using WAV files. And we accomplish this through audio middleware. Right, so you want to trigger the right event instead of sound directly. And so these are the tools that I'll specifically be using: Ableton Live, Fmod, C#, and Unity. But you can use pretty much any tools you want to do this. So for creating the sounds, I just recorded myself saying each letter as like a syllable. A, B, K, D, E, F, G, H. Put that all into Fmod, so they're split out, or they're individual events. So yeah, an event can contain multiple tracks and like parameters, effects, and stuff. But here they're basically just like a wrapper around the original audio. And so, right, we want to trigger the correct event given an input letter. And this is kind of the most involved part of this, so I'll try to walk through it a bit at a time. So let's say we have this concept of an Animalese speaker. There's someone who speaks Animalese. So they're going to have some variables that are like bits of information to hold, and functions, which are things that they can do. So if you imagine like a person, a variable might be the person's height, and a function might be for that person to eat. So for this Animalese speaker, the first variable we're going to look at is this event parent path that just determines like where to find the events to trigger. This playback time between letters, basically the fewer seconds or milliseconds between each letter, the faster the playback is going to be. Playback pitch, basically the higher this is, the higher the frequency of the playback is going to be. So it's going to be like a higher pitch. And then whether to loop the playback. We don't really have to worry about this. And here are some other member variables, just like mostly to keep track of the current state. So there's a lot of like current this and current that. Their names kind of describe what they are. All right, so onto the functions. This is the big one, update playback. It's called once per frame, and basically it determines what when and how to play the audio. So first up is when. Basically, if we've reached that playback time threshold that you saw earlier, we do a bunch of stuff. Otherwise, we increment the current elapsed time so that we can do stuff the next frame. So yeah, this determines what to play, which letter. So we play audio for the current letter. And then this sets us up for the next letter to play. And this handles reaching the end of a phrase. So either we stop or we loop back to the beginning. So you might have noticed that there's this play audio for letter function within the update playback function. So how does this actually work? So play audio for letter determines more specifically the what and how by mapping it to specific events given a letter. So the first thing we want to do is actually to stop the current event since we don't want letters to overlap. We construct an event path using that event parent path variable you saw. Make sure that event path is valid. And if it is, we create a new event, set its attributes, in this case just the pitch, using the playback pitch variable that you saw. And then we play the new event, and that's pretty much it. So yeah, then we create a user interface, basically put everything all in the game engine. So here we have this Isabel character. She is an Animalese speaker, and you can see some of the values we've assigned to the variables for that Animalese speaker. And this text input field basically allows the user or player to enter text and have Isabel speak it. So yeah, let's take a look and listen. So here's an example of how the sliders can be used. And yeah, so actually, I think the most interesting part after we've done all these steps and set up this whole implementation of Animalese is to actually explore the different possibilities that we can do with such a system. So here are a couple of examples. In this one, all the letter audio is replaced with the alphabet song. In this example, we have the letters being mapped to samples of a piano going up the chromatic scale. The speed is lowered and the pitch is set to the original pitch, just so you can hear it better. Oops. And this last example is just having all the samples be drums, and they're actually pitched down in engine as well. Yeah, so that's it. We learned how to speak Animalese. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, I'm David Sue, Ustavad on social media. It's my name backwards. Here's a link to all the source code if you want to play around, add your own samples, anything you want really. And yeah, thanks again.